Now, at this time, General Tariq, he had his commands to not continue pushing on forward.
Okay.
Now, we're not sure exactly why. It might have been something personal, or just might have been his own desire for pushing on, but he kept on going up. And it's amazing just how much this small band of people, they were able to take basically all of the Iberian Peninsula. They had pushed up until the Pyrenees Mountains, which is just bordering France, and then they sort of pushed back a bit. Now, when the Khalifa had heard about this, he said, well, it's not what I wanted.
But now you've done it.
But yeah, you've done it, so we might as well consolidate it.
I guess the feeling was a feeling of a sense of having fulfilled part of their religious duty, in that if you hear your brothers are oppressed, you have to basically go to their aid with whatever you can, inshallah.
Indeed, and of course, there's the fact that they're spreading the banner of Islam. They're spreading the message of Islam. You know, parts of Central Europe who would have known nothing about Islam. Now, all of a sudden, you've got Islam coming across, and the message is spreading.
And probably spread very rapidly and welcomely by the people. I mean, if you was liberated, wouldn't you have a good feeling towards your liberators?
Of course. And you'll find that many of the Christians who, you know, saw the Muslims, especially because they already had that monotheistic belief, when Islam was brought to them, they had no grudges against it. They said, we're willing to submit. This is basically, we're happy with it.
Alhamdulillah, they recognised the truth when it was presented to them.
Indeed. Now, around this time, once the Muslims had stopped at this area, they had, you know, received all their reinforcements, troops coming from Syria, all from around northern Africa, and they had a really big push. And it culminated in a battle at a place in France which is called Tours. Now, this battle was really, it's amazing when you look at the enormity, the immense size of the two armies. Now, I think in this time it was actually the Muslims who had the majority. And it's strange that usually when you look through Islamic history, when the Muslims have the smaller amount, they usually succeed. When they have the larger amount, it's strange. Maybe it's the confidence, maybe it could be a number of things.
It's often the case that God is with the smaller group who is on the truth. And they're steadfast, and throughout all the odds, they come out victorious. Time after time after time.
And indeed, in this case, it was no exception. When the Muslims had the majority, they met the French forces, who at that time, they weren't actually French, they were called the Frankish forces, and they met at this one place. And if you look at what the European historians say, they say this battle basically was the battle for Europe. Had of the Muslims taken this town, they would have pushed on, because Europe had put all of their defense into this one battle. Had of the Muslims taken that, it would have collapsed the Europeans,
No
and Islam
resistance past it.
Islam would have went straight through and conquered all of Europe. And unfortunately...
Or liberated.
Liberated, yes.
These are like small kingdoms.
Of course, yeah, Europe is nothing like...
fragmented at the time.
At that time, it's nothing like Europe was now.
Yeah.
So they met at that battle, and there's a number of things of what happened. One of the things was the Muslims were very concerned about looking after the treasures that they had. So because of this, the Frankish forces actually... in advance had planned for this to happen. They wanted the Muslims to worry about their treasures so they could get in for a surprise attack.
Maybe it's a test from Allah.
Indeed. We know that this happened similarly in the Battle of Uhud, where the Muslims were concerned about the treasures of the battle and they were racing to go towards them.
That's right.
And they had broken their commands. So we say history is repeating itself.
But I guess people fall for the same old tricks. It's like the whispering from the Satan. Same tricks, different situations, but it's the same methodology, like the deception, combining something which is frankly a lie with something which is true, and making it overall polluted.
Indeed, and unfortunately as the Muslims, they fell for this. Through this, or through a number of reasons, they were defeated. So they basically had stopped at the natural border of the Pyrenees Mountains. Now from there, all of the Iberian Peninsula, except a small pocket in the northwestern area, remained Muslim, and the Christians were pushed up into that one area. And for the rest of the history of Al-Andalus, the Christians remained there, and the Muslims never took that. Although they did have skirmishes and battles throughout those, the time that they were there, that area remained Christian. Had they taken that, history would have been a lot different to how it would have turned out now.
Maybe it's the will of Allah, it was meant to be this way for some reason.
Basically what had happened was, for 800 years, that area became known as Al-Andalus. The exact meaning of Al-Andalus, there's a lot of debate over what it meant, but basically what it means is the Iberian Peninsula, which is Spain and Portugal, as we know it today. Now, at the time, the Muslims, unlike other places where they went to, they didn't impose all of their culture onto them. For example, the language of the people still remained Spanish. Although the Muslims would have spoken Arabic, the main language, even the Muslims were speaking, it was Spanish. What's interesting, however, at that time, Spanish was actually written with the Arabic alphabet, and much of the Arabic...
Didn't know that.
Yeah, if you look at some documents, you'll see it's Spanish written in Arabic letters. It's amazing.
Wow.
And of course, a lot of the language, naturally with the Muslims being in charge of the land, had an influence on the Spanish language. And for anyone who knows Spanish, even the sounds of it, you've got a lot of kha, tha, and all of these leads,
that's right, yeah,
which only exist in Arabic. They're not natural European sounds. So this is what came from the Muslims.
Right.
And even linguists will say that up to 10,000 words in the Spanish language have Arabic origins. And many of them actually entered into English from there. So they had an amazing effect, you know, just whether it be in their language, whether it be in the culture, the cuisine, especially if you go to southern Spain, still today, they eat much like the Arabs.
And some people say, and what have the Muslims ever done for us? They don't know their history books.
Indeed. And to look at that, this is one of the most important things. If you look at within the Jewish religion, they actually refer to the time of the Muslim conquest of Spain as the golden era of Judaism, because the Jews were able to flourish amazingly. Most of their great scholars, for example, one of the largest scholars of Judaism, whose name is Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, he actually lived in that area at that time, and most of his major works were in Arabic.
Well, I suppose when you're living under non-oppressed conditions, you can get on with the things that you'd want to do in life.
Indeed, and Al-Andalus became as much a place of Muslim learning as also Christian and Jewish learning. There were some areas where you'd have the Muslims who were in charge, you'd have an Amir who was Christian, and you'd have a mayor of the place who was Jewish. So everyone was really integrated well, and they were living in peace, essentially.
You've got Muslims, Christians and Jews all living together in peace.
Yes.
And I think there's something we've missed over history, isn't there?
We only need to look back and see, you know, how Islam...
Yeah, of course.
Any other system, you'll always find there are some errors, but the Muslims were the ones who truly brought peace and justice. They didn't compromise. They didn't, you know, force things upon others. They were happy to allow everyone to be happy and to let things run. And again, like...
the same attitude what we've got today, basically.
Yeah, of course, except we're not in power at the moment.
But if it was, that would be the situation. And not what a lot of people think, if the Muslims are in power, then we'd impose all these other restrictions on the people who don't buy into that system of beliefs.
Well, we only need to look again at history just to see how things did happen. We see the true times of peace, whether it be in Palestine or Spain or any other area, was when the Muslims had charge.
Well, I suppose this goes in the face of the argument that some people say that the Muslims, like, ploughed on forward and spread Islam by the sword. Is simply not true. When you look at the people around the world, like, for example, in Indonesia, they don't look like Arabs. And they would have had that Arab look about them rather than the look of the native people had they have been, like, taken over by the sword rather than accepting Islam. Like, the evidence doesn't bear true to the accusation that some people say Islam was spread by the sword. It simply doesn't match up.
Indeed, of course, Indonesia especially, the Muslim traders, they came forward, they did their dealings, and they saw the upstanding righteousness of the Muslims.
That's right.
And they began to inquire about this. And the same happened within Spain. I mean, as we mentioned before, they saw that the Muslims were just, and they wanted them to come. And even many areas in Europe, they were inviting the Muslims to come forward. They said, please liberate us. Unfortunately, they weren't able to push all the way forward. Now, as well, when we look at Spain, it's amazing that this era is truly an era which is uncomparable to any other time in history. Europe at that time, or the non-Muslim Europe, Central Europe, was going through what was called the Dark Ages. Now, it's called the Dark Ages basically because the lights had went out. The Roman Empire had fallen, and Europe had fallen into an abyss. It was fallen into dismay.
That period is pretty much worldwide. That's what the Dark Ages. There was nobody following the religion as it was revealed.
And of course, arts-wise, education-wise, things had really fallen, and Europe was not central to the world anymore. But while the non-Muslim historians refer to the Dark Ages of Europe, just in Western Europe, you had this amazing state of Andalus, of Muslim Spain. And out of there, you had cities like Cordoba, And Cordoba at that time was the largest city in the world. It was a city of 1 million people plus. If you look at the street of Cordoba, it was completely lit up. There were street lights, which was unknown in Europe. They had public baths, they had libraries, they had universities. People would travel all from around the world just to study in Andalus.
Wow.
And a true center of learning. So while you can say some of Europe was in the Dark Ages, another part of Europe, which is the Muslim area of Europe, it was